Welcome to the Middle Way Podcast. My name is Dr. Matthew Goodman. This podcast is about seeing the world through the lens of interconnectedness. It's about recognizing our common humanity and discovering pragmatic solutions to improve well-being from the individual to the collective. Thank you so much for being here. There seems to be a trend in conspiracy thinking over the last several years. This has been particularly true in the context of COVID. Theories about the pandemic being planned, or at least taken as a fortuitous occasion to tighten the grips of control, have been on the rise. But the rise of conspiracies goes beyond just COVID. There are also conspiracies surrounding our country's horrific mass shootings, about the personal proclivities of our politicians and other infamous public figures. See here, the baby eating scandal. And some of these conspiracies actually turned out to be true. For example, the case of Jeffrey Epstein, making this complicated. But others are completely hollow, or at worst, they contain seeds of truth. I'd say that this latter piece is worse, the possibility or the fact that they may contain seeds of truth. Because if it turns out that some conspiracies and the theorists that hold them do indeed contain and speak elements of truth, it means that we might actually have to pay attention to them in some way. Again, complex, difficult. To pay attention to the people that we think of and label as crazy and wackos on the other side, whether left or right. We might have to validate and admit what we ourselves have been shunning. Just a possibility. That's a hard task, to find nuance in what the other side is saying, to find seeds or grains or elements or emotions that are true, or at least feel true for them. Here's the deal. Here's the way I see it. The more that we ignore and suppress without deeply listening or dialoguing between the two factions of our social and political fabric, the larger the gap between them becomes, and therefore the bigger the vacancy that can then be filled by new conspiracies or new alternate realities. I think we have to create an alternate or a new reality together because both sides want one. Both sides know that we need to live in a different society, in a different world. This one isn't quite working. But it's going to be hard to create this simply by force, simply by pushing or controlling our side's narrative over the other. Somehow, some way, we have to incorporate the pain and the wisdom from both sides. It can't just be one side's mythology winning out over the other. We have to find some truth together. And the only way, I think, to find truth in this environment that we're living in today is to build trust. So I think that we're headed into some new reality. I think that the worldview that we take for granted today is beginning to crumble. And I'm not necessarily judging this as something that's negative. In fact, I'll come right out and say that I think that we need a shift in our worldview to one that's more holistic. Without sounding too airy-fairy here, I think that our consciousness is coming upon some sort of precipice of being able to grow. And I think that the world will begin to reflect that in some way. But before we build any type of new order, there has to be disorder. There has to be chaos. There has to be growing pains. This is the birth process of birthing something new. And this is partly what I think the function of some of these conspiracies are. Actually, to create chaos. Let me explain what I mean by that. The conspiracies themselves, whether they're right or wrong, true or not, whether they contain little or a lot of merit, are functioning as a sort of bulldozer to the accepted worldview that we currently all hold today. So let me say this again. The conspiracies, whether right or wrong, are functioning as a sort of bulldozer to help to tear down or break down the worldview that we have today because it's not working. The question, I believe, is how we're going to arrive at a new worldview, a new way of being in our society that replaces the one that we're currently living in. Are we going to arrive there through complete chaos, through a sort of civil war of ideas and beliefs and values and perceptions, and create so much disorder, so much chaos that we have to build something new from scratch? Or can we potentially narrow the gap between opposing worldviews, skillfully stitching them together, keeping what works, discarding what doesn't work, such that we can collaboratively build something newer and more beautiful together? In this episode, I want to take a look at conspiracy theories and what I think is the incipient emergence of a new mythology, a new framework, new worldview, one that goes beyond science, but doesn't discard science. And in fact, one that uses science even more true to its form and intention than what we're experiencing today. And I'll explain what I mean by that later on. My goal here is not to evaluate whether certain conspiracy theories are true or not. I haven't gone down those rabbit holes and I won't. At least I don't want to go down those rabbit holes to try to evaluate for myself, either maybe because I'm afraid of what I might find or I'm just afraid of losing touch with reality. So that's not my goal, to decide whether they have merit or not. Instead, I'm interested in why these conspiracies are on the rise. What's going on in the psyche, in our collective psyche? What is the environment or the context that's allowing them to grow? And what's the function of them? What are they potentially doing? What function are they serving? And what's on the other side of that? And through this, whatever's happening, whatever clash of beliefs and perception of reality that's happening right now, we're going to have to form something new. So, how can we form something new that works for everyone or that works for most people? And how can we form something new that we can create on a path of least resistance or least destruction? I would prefer that. I don't know about other people. First, I just want to share some thoughts on conspiracy theories themselves as it pertains to the psyche, collective psyche. And then we can get into more about context and function and the emergence of this new story. There are a lot of conspiracy theories throughout history that have turned out to be objectively true. Again, I haven't gone down a lot of rabbit holes. I'm not someone who's generally interested in conspiracy theories. And then there are also ones throughout history and today that have no merit at all, no objective basis in reality. And these are the ones that we're concerned about, I presume. So let's just isolate those for a second, because these seem to be the most insidious. Let's just pretend that some of these conspiracy theories, let's just pretend that all of them have no merit in objective reality. What are they doing here? Why are people having them? Why are people so drawn to them? And what problem is it presenting for us as a society? And how do we handle that? I think we have to recognize that even in the case of no objective merit, there's still something that echoes, that rings true about conspiracy theories. This is, I think, where our attention has to be focused. And by that, I mean it's what people experience on the inside. what the story is that they're living, their internal experience, their emotional experience. If this is neglected, then we're in trouble. Then conspiracy theories are projected onto the outside world. So Carl Jung, who I am such a fanboy of, it's probably not the right use of the word fanboy, but I'm a huge fan of Carl Jung. He, in his writing and in his lectures, when it came to UFOs, entertained the possibility that sure, UFOs might be real. Sure, but maybe not. But he was intrigued by them as a sort of projection of the collective psyche, as a symbol that represented something important about the mythology of the psyche at the time. He wrote that, quote, "The psychological aspect is so impressive that one almost must regret that the UFOs seem to be real after all." So again, here, placing some emphasis on the psyche. And this is generally how I view conspiracies that seem to be miles away from objective reality. They're projections of some sort of emotion or some sort of story or myth that people are experiencing, and probably that is being suppressed or not listened to in some way. Some symbolic representation of what people are feeling and experiencing, projection of that onto the world. When emotions and stories are not heard, and we know that this is happening today as we're listening and empathizing with each other less and less between the social and political gaps between us. When these things are not heard, they're formed into concrete, literal beliefs. When we can't hold space for the myth, the myth has to show up somewhere. And if it can't be held internally in our collective psyche, if we can't hold that, it kind of gets popped out into the external world. And then we start to create stories around that, projecting those things onto people and situations and allow those characters to play out the drama of what we think is happening in real life, but is really just a projection of some sort of experience that we haven't digested internally together. So, is it possible that if we're not seeing each other and not listening to each other, that the repressed contents of our psyche will become projected onto objective reality, such that we're now forced to see these stories being inhabited and played out by politicians and corporations and celebrities and other figures and all of the dramas on the world stage? When psychic energies are not held and forced into physical form, then they take on radical stories. This is sort of like what happens in dreams. I see dreams as stories that our mind tells us. So representations. These are stories being told about the energies of the body. The energies of the body themselves don't take the form of characters and personalities and stories, but they can be interpreted that way by the mind. It's an interpretation of our experiences. So in this case, I think we have to ask ourselves the question, are these stories that are being told are they real or are they not real? It's my experience. Did I not experience that? So is that real? I don't have a good answer. But do they depict in some way what the energies of the body are? And in the same way, we could say that in reference to the waking world, we could ask the same question. Are our dreams not real? Did you not experience a dream? Do our dreams not exist? We had them. They're not real in the sense that I didn't actually go to Trader Joe's with my grandma last night. I didn't actually have that dream, but that's what came up as an example because it's sort of absurd. My grandma and I don't even live in the same state, although it would be great to go to Trader Joe's with my grandma. So maybe that will become a reality. But that didn't actually happen, but it did. I guess it happened for me, or it told some story about something. And I'll just refrain from trying to interpret that. I don't think there's a good interpretation. And the story comes up, the dream comes up, I think, because it's something that we can't hold physically or emotionally. And so it's turned into a story, some other way of presenting it to our consciousness. And I think the same thing happens with the projection of these myths and conspiracies onto the real world is it's some other way of presenting to our consciousness something that we're not seeing as a collective. And if one part of society, if one the left or the right or whatever group is being suppressed and not heard, how else are they going to get those energies seen and witnessed other than to make a big noise and make a big fuss by claiming things that tell a story about their experience because no one else is listening to their experience. So let's just put it out there. That's the only way we can get society's attention. I think what's interesting is that conspiracy theories and I would say rather just a general mistrust of authority is probably a better way of looking at it. Mistrust of authority, mistrust of people in power, of government is not just a thing that's popping up on the right. It's also popping up on the left or on the far left or what we would have previously considered far left. And I think now the political spectrum is being reshuffled and we don't know who sits where anymore. But let me explain. So there's a lot of people on the left that I think during this time of COVID have developed a distrust of the government, distrust of authority, and there's a particular crowd of people that this has happened to, and I'm laughing because the name is so appropriate and so funny. But these are folks who generally would be on the left who are into spirituality. These are the yoga teachers and the healers and the Reiki practitioners and the people who love to shop at Erewhon. If you live in California, you understand that. It's basically like Whole Foods on steroids. And I'm for sure kind of in this crowd in some sense or overlap with this crowd. So I'm not um, saying this in a demeaning way, but generally kind of a spiritual leaning person or community. These folks have, it's turned out, have been quite skeptical. Not all of them, but there's a certain faction of these folks that have been quite skeptical of the vaccine and very much in favor of body autonomy and skeptical, and one might say conspiracy, if you'd like to say it that way, about COVID being a, you know, intentional, planned act as a way to gain control over people, et cetera, et cetera. You know the story. So coming back to the name here, these folks have been termed woo-anon. And there's actually been some writing and reporting on this in the LA Times and maybe other places as well. So you might look up woo-anon. Just Google that and you can find some stories on it. But super interesting, both the left and the right. And it seems like the left and the right are beginning in that way, this distrust of the government. It's also, we see the kind of rise or the draw towards more populism or populist figures on the left and the right. And in that way, the left and the right are beginning to join hands with each other. And if they do, and when they do, the whole structure might snap. And now no one knows where they fall. It's no longer the playing field or the spectrum of left and right that we previously knew that we could orient ourselves against, because I know I'm left because I'm left compared to these people, or I know I'm right because I'm right compared to these people. I think we're might be entering a sort of confusion about our identities and where we stand politically, and probably a good thing in the long term. Not so much in the short term, but necessary in the long term. Why are the fringes? Why is this happening on the fringes? Why are the fringes fraying from the middle? Why are we bending the structure so much that it might begin to snap? And I think this is because something new wants to emerge. Again, we both, when I say we both sides know it. Both sides want it. We all feel it together that we want something new to emerge, but there's a battle. Should it be the way that I think it should be on the left? Or should it be the way that this person thinks it should be on the right? And how do we get it to be our way? I don't know if that's possible without completely wiping out half of the population. So, just taking a step back to the worldview that we've all experienced and inhabited and have taken for granted over the past few hundred years. This is the thing that I think is at stake in some sense, not completely, but in some sense. And this is, again, what I think the function of the conspiracies is to shake this thing up. The worldview that that we see the world through that we don't even question, the worldview that by which we agree upon what is true, is the worldview of science and objectivism and reason. This is objectively true. This is a fact. Therefore, that's what we value the most. The truth exists out there. And I'm not running away from this. I just want to explain. I just want to make that clear. But there's some sort of challenge to this cropping up. People on the right have famously been gravitating towards things like alternative facts. They don't really care what the objective reality is. It doesn't really matter if Trump lost the election, because I feel like he won. I feel like it felt like it was stolen. It doesn't matter if it was actually stolen. But it feels that way to me, they might say. And then the left is all about hardcore facts. Why can't you see the facts? These are the facts. You can't see the facts. And maybe what they refer to as the facts are the facts. And if the facts are the facts, then they're the facts. But if the facts are not the facts, then that's a problem. So if we latch on to something that this is a fact and it's not a fact, well, then there's a problem. And then what's going to happen is that the other side is going to say, no, I don't care about your facts because I don't think you have the whole story. So what are they going to do? They're going to not care about the facts anymore. They care about the alternative facts. Let's just tear the whole thing down. That's an extreme example, but there has to be some ability to have nuance and to be open enough to discovering new facts. And I think that was so poorly modeled during COVID that it's just exacerbated this battle between these two alternate realities. We didn't demonstrate as a country the ability to update our facts, to update our knowledge. We were rigid. We held on to something that we labeled the truth when the truth is a continual process of discovery and updating. And because of that, people don't want to trust the facts. They want to just tear the whole thing down. They don't care about what you label as true. And there's some merit to that because, again, this has to be a process of discovery. And ideally, it's a process that takes place between two sides that only happens if there's trust. The truth is a collaborative process. Neither side has a monopoly on the truth. That's why it's so important to listen to the other side. We have to trust that the other side has some wisdom that we cannot see, even if it's just a little tiny bit, even if it's something that's just in their heart, that's inside. There's some wisdom there in people's experience. We have to trust that we don't own the truth, either side. We literally can't if we're all in this together. We're each holding mirrors. Both sides are holding mirrors to each other's blind spots. So if we can't negotiate and collaborate on the truth, then one side in frustration and in angst and anger is going to want to destroy the truth as it appears today. And the function of this, the function, I believe, at some deeper level, is not to make that worldview the new reality. It's not to replace this worldview that values objectivism and reason with something that denies those things. It's the function of acting as a bulldozer to tear things up a little bit so that we can discover something new together, to discover something more holistic, something that values science and reason. And again, something that actually utilizes this process of science more true to its form than we're actually using it today. Today being a form of faith, placing our faith in something static that doesn't change or evolve, something that we label the truth, but neglecting this process of discovery. So the function is that some intelligence inside of us, deep in our collective psyche, knows that it has to stir things up. And the only way to do that is to make a big scene, to throw a temper tantrum, and to throw out these crazy conspiracy theories, forcing us somehow to reach deep into our hearts to try to form a bridge. The more we can't do that, the wilder it's going to get because symptoms elevate the more we don't pay attention to them. They elevate so that they're begging for attention. This is a symptom that's begging for attention. The deeper purpose of it is to try, I believe, to bring it together. And I think this is the same phenomenon that happened with Trump in 2016 and prior and after, is that it's almost like Freud's death instinct. And I think that these people, I laugh because it sounds so derogatory, these people, but I think that the people who support him and who are energized by him and voted for him are working out, are serving a purpose in the system. They're serving the purpose of wanting to break down, to introduce chaos, so that we can build new order. So, can you see how there is something intelligent about this? On the surface, it's easy to judge. But what if, just potentially, what if this deeper instinct of our collective organism, this instinct to change things, to introduce chaos so that we can build new order, which every system has to do, what if that's being expressed through a certain faction of our population? It has to be expressed through somewhere. And in that way, we need to be grateful to people on the other side. You don't have to agree with them, but I'm just saying to recognize that perhaps it's serving some function and not for that worldview to take over again, but just the function of creating something, some disturbance that will force us to build something together. So we have to decide collectively, are we going to rebuild something newer and more beautiful together by threading the needle and restitching reality collaboratively, collectively? Or are we going to allow our more primitive, reflexive instincts to take over and see, let's just see if one side wins over the other and create some new reality? And I don't think reality or the universe likes that very much. Again, this process of truth is always evolving, it's always rediscovering itself. So, one worldview as it exists right now, just by definition, cannot win over another one. Because in that sense, there is now an attachment to that worldview, an attachment to anything, not allowing things to be flexible and to continue to evolve and discover. That's going to be problematic. So, if we want to see some real problems, let's just let one worldview win over the other one and rigidly adhere to that as our new religion. That's not science. The worldview of science winning over non science is not science because it becomes a sort of faith. Okay, in closing, this has been fun. We live in a dualistic world. Ideas always have their opposites, beliefs always have their opposites. So, in a dualistic world, in a society, in a country, or in a world, or in a community, or whatever, there's always going to be opposing ideas and beliefs. Of course, beliefs don't exist without their opposites, and we're each expressions of that, trying to balance each other out, trying to hold mirrors to our blind spots. That's the nature, I think, of the psyche. Psyche's dualistic. And I think it's our task to be able to continue to listen and hold space and collaboratively find truth. When we ignore this dualism, when we become attached to our own identities and ideas and beliefs, when we believe that only I and only my side is right, attachment creates more suffering, creates more division in this dualistic world, creates more polarization. Polarization is a symptom. And as a symptom, this is causing suffering. We're suffering from polarization and division in our society. And the function of symptoms, by doing this, function of the suffering, the symptom, the pain of this separation is to get us to change. That's what symptoms do. And through this division, through the polarization, to get us to change, to see our shared humanity, to see that, oh, we do indeed live in a dualistic world. I didn't realize that the person on the other side is just reflecting something else, the opposite of my belief, because that's how beliefs work. And because we're all interconnected. The more we ignore the symptom, the more we double down on our beliefs and our identities, become more concrete, more we can hold space, then the more extreme the symptom has to become. The more the symptom is forcing us to try to change. Oh, you're not listening now? Okay, I'm going to get even louder. I'm going to become even worse. I'm going to create more suffering. Will you listen to me then? When will you see your shared humanity? What do we have to do? Oh, you're not listening? Okay. Let's just take this even further. You want to have a civil war? Okay. Is that what it's going to take to see our shared humanity? And conspiracy theories, I think, are behind this, driving that wedge for a purpose, pushing us to a point where we have to decide, what are we going to do? Are we going to completely fracture, completely fall apart, and break into chaos and experience more suffering because my belief is just so right, and I don't want to listen to or hear anything that the person on the other side has to say? Trust me, I know. Or can we have the courage to try to have some trust in one another? Not to believe everything. We don't have to believe or accept. We can investigate on our own, but to listen and be willing to investigate. And this is the process, seeing our common humanity, trusting, seeing the other as a reflection of me that's serving some purpose for us to come together and to evolve. That, I believe, will allow us to reorganize into a different and more beautiful worldview and world. That's the middle way. Thank you again for listening. Remember that you can really help the show by clicking subscribe or by leaving a rating, a review, or sharing the episode with someone else. Thanks again, and see you back here soon.